our second speaker will be Professor Francesco Vossilla from Florence, Italy. And he also, he is actually an art historian. And he's going to talk about two Franciscans in the long century of Marco Polo, Dante and Boccaccio. I try to ignore those Italian names, but you know he's going to talk about two Franciscans. Okay, Professor Vossilla, please.
Good day from Florence. And Florence is the hometown of Giovanni Marignolli, and of course Dante and Boccaccio. What I will try to give you here is some kind of a historical context for the history of the church, looking at Far East Asia, most especially Yuan dynasty, trying also to summarize some facts about Montecorvino and Marignolli. So between 1245 and 1248, Pope Innocent IV wrote 3 epistles to the Tartars, calling for global peace, and entrusted Franciscans and Dominican emissaries to explain Latin Christianity across hostile terrain. Innocent IV included the Tartars and their Christian tributaries in a perspective of universal salvation, contingent upon their alignment with the true faith. The concept of universal salvation created the apostolic mechanism through which the Holy See justified diplomatic overtures in Mongol-conquered countries for over a century. Simultaneously, the Mongol Khans of Persia and China pursued relations with Latin Europe to counterbalance both the Byzantine and the Mamelukes. Kublai Khan was proclaimed Yuan emperor in 1271. Marco Polo's eulogy of Kublai stands parallel to the Ghibelline ideology crying for a centralized imperial authority in Europe. Only on the early 14th century, Marco Polo's notion about Kublai supplemented a novel sighting of the so-called Tartars, stoking the European dream that the Khans would be allies versus the Islamization of Asia. Not the case of Can Grande della Scala, ruler of Verona, Ghibelline leader and host of Dante. His appellation Can Grande, grand dog, Cane, is consistent with the epic of the Khans. Interestingly, textile found in Can Grande's tomb came from Yuan China and from Mongol-led Persia. As Polo states, Kublai Khan bestowed the governance of Chinese provinces, quote, to Tartars, Saracens, and Christians who were of his own family and were not from Katai. We will see who were the Christians who were of the family of Kublai Khan. Puzzling informations about religious tolerance of the Mongol monarchs started to flow westward. They conformed to the legacy of Genghis Khan. He had founded a transnational and religiously variegated empire. This conference is a summary of 3 chapters of a book I'm writing for the Macao Ricci Institute regarding Giovanni Marignolli, OFM. Hailing from the cloisters of Santa Croce in Florence, Marignolli emerges as the last envoy of the papal court engaging the Yuan dynasty after Giovanni da Montecorvino's death in 1328. And this is the house of Marignolli, where Marignolli lived, in Piazza del Duomo di Firenze. This is his tomb, or a monument to his memory, with his coat of arms. In the early 14th century, Florence was a mercantile city-state at the periphery of transcontinental routes born out of the Pax Mongolica. Chinese silk was sold in many Italian cities, and Florentine entrepreneurs venture on the Silk Road looking for textiles, spices, pigments, precious stones, and rare ceramics. This was the case of the Florentine Francesco Balducci Pegolotti. He worked for the Bardi Company, banking company, and described commerce on the route to Beijing, quote, where is a great resort of merchants and a vast number of trades. Right before 1338, Marignolli's embassy to Beijing of the 1340s. The Bardi and their rivals, the Peruzzi, other bankers, were among the patrons who sponsored Giotto's work in Marignolli's convent of Santa Croce. The Florentine historian Giovanni Villani mentioned the rise in power of Temujin, of Genghis Khan, in his Nuova Cronica of the beginning of the 14th century. Villani recorded that, quote, the son of Genghis Khan were the main sovereigns among the Tartars, end of quote, and attested that these rulers were, quote, not only pagan worshippers of idols, but also Christian, end of quote. He admired the ceremony that had reminded Kanjus, the Khan of Khans, of his humble origin in the steppes by using simple felt during the coronation. Florentine versions of Marco Polo's Milione date at the beginning of the 14th century. These two are my own personal Milione that I was reading when I was a boy in Firenze many years ago. The magnanimity of Kublai Khan ruling over China as the grandson of Genghis, the opulence of his palaces, the variety of products, and the magnitude of UN cities described by Polo motivated Italians to perceive China as a vast market where to buy and sell, and Kublai as its good ruler. Even the two of the greatest Florentine glories of literature, Dante and Giovanni Boccaccio, mentioned the Tartars and their textiles. These artifacts were described either made of sober white felt or of striking silk with intricate patterns and woven flowers and animals. Dante wrote of the monster Geryon in Inferno 17 as an effigy of fraud whose coat was more sophisticated than anything woven in Asia. And you can read it by yourself. No Tatar or Turk has ever woven a cloth more color in field and figure. In the Esposizioni sopra la commedia di Dante of 1373, Giovanni Boccaccio's reading of Dante's cryptic utterance tra feltro e feltro, Inferno 1, 105, between felt and felt, posits an allusion to the funeral felt used by the formidable Khans in Asia, beginning with Genghis Khan. Noteworthy is Boccaccio's portrayal of Tartar China, the Middle Kingdom, China, where the vast treasures congregated, the richest country in the world. In this land of good governors, the Mongol emperors post-conquest had become less rapacious, as evidenced by their use of felt during coronations and funeral ceremonies. Boccaccio, to criticize the moral climate of Italy for his book, The Decameron, 1348 and 1343, and in the tale concerning generosity and envy, introduced two Katai entrepreneurs, Nathan and Mitidranes. Of course, these are fictitious characters. And Polo's description of the Beijing imperial abode of Kublai Khan was so famous that Boccaccio used it as a source to picture this exotic and business-oriented country of China. One of Boccaccio's characters had built one of the most beautiful, vast, and luxurious palaces of all times, there being no shortage of skilled craftsmen in the area, and it is sumptuously furnished with everything required for the proper entertainment of gentlemen. The names of Montecorvino and Marignolli were dormant until the 16th century, when they began to steer within Franciscan accounts. In 1710, Friar Pietro Antonio Quaresima, OFM, set forth a chronicle regarding the diplomatic engagement of the mendicant orders in Asia before the Jesuits were even born. He refers to the Franciscans who were dispatched to the Tartars as ambassadors, being tasked to, quote, handle matters that prove beneficial for our holy faith, end of quote. Quaresima recounts the tales of Montecorvino and Marignolli, the latter, whom Quaresima dubs Giovanni da Fiorenza, was the bold apostolic legate that sent forth to the empire of the Grand Khan by Benedict XII, a mission undertaken following a direct entreaty from the emperor of the Tartar himself. Quaresima refers to a missive signed July 11, 1336, from the Yuan Weizong Emperor to Pope Benedict XII, ruling at Avignon 1334-1342. The emperor proposed the following. Here you can see the letter, and I'm reading which are the proposals of the emperor. The establishment of a regular diplomatic channel facilitating the exchange of envoys between the Catholic Church and the Yuan dynasty. The request that the ruler of Katai, Weizong, would remain a recipient of Christian divine blessings and remembrance in the Pope's prayers. Weizong beseeched the Holy See to regard his Allen Guards with the perspective reserved for steadfast Catholics. Finally, he requests a formal tribute of European horses and curiosity from the sun-setting country. Before his death in 1328, the blessed Giovanni da Montecorvino, OFM, converted many Allen families. Writing to the papacy, the Allen dignitaries of the UN court were led by Jovens, the Minister of State, Fotim, in charge of Weizong War Cabinet. The Allens had received instruction in the Catholic faith from the Pope Nuncio, Friar Giovanni. So the presence of a nuncio in Beijing is required again in the 1330s China. Contracts inform us of the presence in China of trading cartels of Italian businessmen like Marco Polo. Just like the Allen warriors, they needed a watchful pastor to work in a land with peculiar mores, for example, concubinage of the clergy. The Pope knew that the Mongol monarchs dictated the terms that regulated the flow of goods from China to Europe. His legates departed from Avignon in 1338. The legates were several, and Marignolli led the expedition. On 19 August 1342, Marignolli delivered letters from Pope Benedict and King Robert of Anjou of Naples to Weizong, presenting the last UN emperor with Western war horses he requested. This is the so-called Marco Polo's Bible, found in China and donated to Cosimo III Medici by the Flemish Jesuit Philippe Couplet. Couplet believed it was a relic of Polo's journey to Katai. Couplet's indifference towards the Franciscans is a defensive reaction of the debate within Catholic institutions over missionary supremacy in Qin China. The cultivated association of Polo's Katai with China, as suggested by the Jesuits Ricci and Martini, was auspicious for the Franciscans. By attesting that their men had evangelized the country ruled over by Kublai Khan, they claim a presence in the same missionary terrain and on better ground than the Jesuits. In fact, after a request of Kublai Khan, Pope Nicholas IV selected Montecorvino as his legate to Catay. The obituary plaque for Nicholas IV in Santa Maria Maggiore of Roma underlines the Franciscans' Pope vision. The Pope had distinguished himself as a legate to Gregory X to Constantinople and as an emissary to Greece and to the King of France. He had communion with Tartary to bring back the faithful. Montecorvino and Polo stride through the corridors of time as contemporaries, their accounts resonating with the tales of Catay, for instance, concerning historical figures supporting the UN regime, such as the Ongut King George, kin to the UN sovereigns, and the Alan Guardians of the Mongols' emperor lives. Montecorvino operated without any associate until 1304. Over 100 Buddhist and Taoist temples, along with numerous mosques, adorn Beijing. Interspersed among them were Syriac churches and an archbishop since 1275. The languages of Christianity in China were the Syriac for liturgy and the Uyghur for dissemination and hymns. George's Ongut clan was of Syriac Christian denomination, as many women of the Grand Khan's family, for example, Naiman or Kereit. Most notably, Sorgachtani Beki, the Christian wife of Tolue Khan, emerged as a figure of immense influence, as the mother of Möngke Khan and Kublai Khan. A reputation for virtue and political acumen was acknowledged by Friar Giovanni da Pian del Carpine, OFM. In a testament of trust, the Yuan Shenzong Emperor permitted Giovanni da Montecorvino to establish 2 Catholic edifices in Beijing, Cambaluc. On January 8, 1305, Giovanni proclaimed to his confreres residing in Crimea, "I built a church in the city of Cambaluc, in which the king has his chief residence. This I completed 6 years ago. I built a bell tower to it and put 3 bells in it. I baptized there, as well as I can estimate up to this time, some 6,000 persons. And if those charges against me, of which I've spoken, have not been made, I should have baptized more than 30,000, and I'm often still engaged in baptizing." The congregation of the 30,000 new Catholics mirrors the number of the Alan warriors of Greek Orthodox denomination serving as UN imperial guards. Though Kublai's entreaty to the papacy carries a veneer of legend, his mandate to Maffeo and Niccolò Polo included the enlistment of Catholic clerics. In Marco Polo's rendering of the events, these Catholic scholars emerge as prospective mediators with representative of diverse creeds. Yet another saga unfolds where the Beijing-born Rabban Sauma, an historian monk of Ongut ethnicity, traveled to Catholic Europe for a diplomatic missions orchestrated by the Mongol sovereigns of Persia with the sanction of their king in Beijing. Sauma desired to pray in Jerusalem with his student Marcos, who was another Ongut. Sauma encountered Marcos at the Fanshan Mountains. Since 1919, archaeologists uncovered stones at this Beijing site adorned with cross depictions and Syriac inscriptions. According to the Syriac history of Mar Yaballah, Catholicos of the East, and of Rabban Sauma, Visitator General, written around 1318, the Ongut kings, Aibuka and Kombuka, equipped the monks with gifts destined to the center of the Syriac Patriarchate. These warriors, quote, who were the sons-in-law of Kublai Khan, envision a fellowship with the fathers of the West, end of quote. Sauma and Marcus made a necessary halt in the Ilkhanate, Persia under Mongol rule, where the bishops elected Marcus as the Eastern Syriac Catholicos 1281 with the name of Yaballah III. His jurisdiction extended from the Levant to the UN territories. This election was not solely grounded in Marquez's religious charisma. As the chronicler relates, he was acquainted with the Mongol rule. The Book of Tower, authorized in Arabic during the 14th century, adds another layer to this connection. Kublai Khan himself had entrusted Marquez, quote, with a garment to carry with him, so that he would immerse it in the Jordan River and take it to the tomb of Christ the Lord, end of quote. Before becoming the Catholic...
Sorry, can you finish quickly as possible? So we're over time a little bit.
Okay. Before becoming the Catholicos, Marquez was ordained as the bishop to the Katai and the Ong, serving both the northern Chinese and the Ongut dwelling north of the Yellow River, Marco Polo's Tenduk region, the commandery of Tiande. So when Rabban Salma arrived in Roma, he met with Girolamo Masci, OFM, who ascended to the papal throne as Nicholas IV, February 1288. The first Franciscan pope wanted to secure tolerance for Catholic communities across Asia. And this is the description of the author of the History of Maria Balla, that describes the dialogue between Sama and Nicholas IV as a catalyst for the reunion of all Christians. No? Rabban Sama said to Mar Papa, Nicholas IV, I wish to celebrate the Eucharist so that you might see our ruse, and the Pope commanded him to do so as he had asked, and on that day a very large number gathered in order to see how the ambassadors of the Mongols celebrated the Eucharist. They rejoiced and said, the language is different, but the use is the same. So here, what I wanted to say to finish is that we have a number of documents that don't explain the life of Marco Polo. The life of Marco Polo and the experience of Marco Polo at the UN court is basically based on the Milione, but instead we have a number of documents, both in the Vatican collection and actually in some documents in China that tell us that the missionaries in China were mostly there for a diplomatic mission that was initiated by Pope Nicholas IV, the first Franciscan Pope, and all of the documents have been published, and archaeology in China in the recent times had actually better evaluated the presence of Christianity among the different components of this multi-ethnic, multi-religious Yuan dynasty that needs to be interpreted as another Chinese dynasty and not something foreign, because of the foreignness of the UN. Let's say the foreigners of the UN as entail in history also the foreigners of the Christian presence, as instead we know that in medieval period, many of the peoples of today, northern China and Inner Mongolia, were already Christianized by the Syriac Church, and later, as Montecorvino is recounting, and Giovanni Marignolli as well in his book, they became, some of them, especially the aristocrats in the, let's say, war cabinet of the Yuan dynasty, they turned to Latin Christianity. Thank you.